Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining today. This is a Bytespeed's webinar featuring Gravity Gaming and Ruckus Networks. My name is Aaron Kobernick. I'm the Ruckus Solution Specialist here at Bytespeed. Today, we're joined here with Henry Burke of Gravity Gaming and Bill Stoutler of Ruckus Networks. We're going to be discussing common pitfalls and best practices for both esports and networking. We'll also discuss ways to leverage ERate funding, as well as some options for NASEF scholarships. So if you could, please introduce yourself, Henry and Bill, and then we'll get into the Q&A.
I'm Henry Burke. I'm the Gravity Gaming Technical Lead at Bytespeed. I've been with the company 7 years, and I look forward to talking about networking and esports today and seeing how we can help you guys get started creating your own programs.
Yeah, and hi, my name is Bill Stelter. I'm the territory manager here in Chicago, responsible for sales of Ruckus products for the state of Illinois, and been with the company a little over 22 years.
All right, thanks, guys. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll try to discuss them here as we go through. Otherwise, we do have a series of kind of common questions and things that we're going to kind of review. Looks like, so the first one might be for Henry. About how many gaming stations do you think a program will need, and what's the best way to prepare their network for them?
Yeah, so it's a great question. Generally speaking, knowing the number of machines you want to start with your program depends on the games you're going to play. Almost all games these days are going to be 5 players per team, except for Rocket League, which is going to be 3 people per team. So generally we tell people as a starting number, if you can get 5, that's kind of like the bare minimum that we generally recommend. But a lot of people shoot for like 10 or 11. That way 11 if you need like a hot swap in case something was to go wrong, or just to have an extra PC for potentially a streaming setup or something like that. That kind of tends to be the standard. On the collegiate level, you're going to see that kind of jump up closer to 20 to 30 machines. But it's kind of personal preference and like what your budget can afford and how many students you have signing up along those lines too. Keeping in mind too that number is important when you're thinking about like your switching and stuff, and making sure that you're thinking ahead in the future so that you want to be hardwired in for all these machines to have the best experience. So having a switch that's capable of supporting however many devices you're going to have in that room is also something you need to be prepared for ahead of time. So yeah, appreciate the question, Aaron.
Cool. All right. So Bill, this one looks like it might be for you. Why do you think it's important to have quality switching in these environments?
So our education team recovered some data, some poll data from a number of gamers, and lags and disconnects were probably the most common issue that they experienced. Actually, over 2/3 of them saying that they were extremely detrimental to the experience. And when you look at lag and disconnect issues, you're talking about things like packet loss, latency, jitter, and those are certainly there's many factors that contribute to those, but one of the issues would be the switching infrastructure that you're choosing either for your club room or the competition. Any of the networks that you're building out, that's certainly a key element to it. So as you're looking into that, maybe to go more specifically of kind of what to look for, because I'm sure we have a mixture of coaches and tech directors and what have you on the call today. So trying to keep it very vendor independent, if you will. But when you start looking at what you might want to look for in a switch, I would certainly be looking for something that's been shipping for some time, that's a stable product. The firmware has been shipping for quite a period of time. You look at the redundancy, things like power and fans. Many of the switches that are extremely cost effective might only have, a single power supply or fan. And when you look at the mean time between failure issues with switches, anything that's moving is going to be the most common thing to fail. So look for something that has redundant power and fans. Don't just think about the port speeds, because really the thing in the network that's going to add the least amount of latency is the switch itself. But certainly if you want to provide some future proofing, look for 10 gig switches. 25 gig appears to be coming along as the most predominant next end station connectivity speed. But consider the room that you're doing it in. If it's a small room, look for fanless options. I would be remiss if I didn't look for the availability of the product itself, given the environment we're in. Don't forget about that. And where that product's in and its life cycle. And then I was spending some time with our principal SE in preparation for this presentation. And I would start considering design options. As Henry was talking about, the number of connections that you're looking at from a wired perspective. Is this a single switch? Are you going to need to stack a couple of switches? Or is it going to be even larger where you might look at a spine leaf type connectivity option where you could even bring in redundant connections out to the internet? So really the reason it's important is that's what most people complain about, but there's a lot of good ways to get around that.
Cool. Thanks, Bill. All right.
Sure.
So next one here, looks like this one's for Henry. So what are like the required network speeds for esports? Can you touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. So when it comes to gaming, the faster the speed, the better. If you can get to a 1 gig connection, that's kind of like ideal. But generally speaking, if you're in a remote area or you don't have access to that, or you're limited on bandwidth, the kind of bare minimum I usually recommend for competitive competition is going to be 50 megs down and 10 megs up. If you can get that, generally speaking, you're going to have a pretty good experience across the board. Like I said, you kind of want to shoot for better, but that's kind of like the bare minimum to have a decent experience. Another important thing too is not necessarily speed, but kind of like what Bill touched on earlier is going to be like ping, latency, packet loss, things like that. So making sure utilizing your network to bring those things down as low as latency as possible, as well as picking the correct server in the games you're in so that you can be as close as possible to the server you're going out to on the web. Keeping your ping low is super important. If you when it comes to ping, generally speaking, if you can be under 50 milliseconds, that's kind of ideal. Anything over 100 is going to significantly affect your gameplay. I think Bill has a slide that he showed me a while ago when we were prepping for this meeting that said something about anything over, it was like, I think 200 ping gives you a 50% chance of losing that fight compared to someone with less ping than you. So ping is massive in the effect that it does make a massive difference on how it affects your gameplay. And if you're going to play on the highest competitive level, trying to keep that low as well as, your latency down and everything along those lines. And sometimes these things can be out of your hands. You can't control ping all the time, but some things you can control are your internet speeds, your latency, things like that. And working with your tech directors at your school and your ISP to utilize to see what's out there and the best fit and option for you is super important, and planning ahead for your network. The network is sometimes the most important part of esports. It's kind of the backbone to make everything work. All esports are played online, and you need a good network to be able to play. So making sure that you're staying on top of that and kind of planning for the future really goes a long ways for when you finally do decide to start your program or you grow your program to a bigger size. So
cool. Thanks, Henry. So Bill, this next one, what do you think on how ISP bottlenecks could affect your experience with this?
Yeah, I mean, raise your hand if you haven't, gotten on a conference call, via Teams or Zoom or something like that at 9 o'clock in the morning when everybody in your neighborhood is jumping on it. And you know how that looks. So, ISP bottlenecks are occurring more and more. It's extremely important, just as Henry had mentioned. The slide he was referring to, I'll try and show you here in a second, but Ruckus sponsored the esports team in Philadelphia, and they did some analysis in regards to the latency and how that affected some of the things that they were doing, some testing. So I can show you that slide in a second. But one thing that's being done to improve the bottlenecks, so CommScope, Ruckus is owned by CommScope. CommScope is a major manufacturer of equipment for the home market. You may have heard of the Surfboard brand of gateway for your home, Comcast and Charter. certainly use that. So there's a new technology, low latency DOCSIS coming out, LLD coming out. And really what it's intending to do is reduce the latency from, 250 milliseconds to sub 15. And that really encompasses the gateway itself that would be at the home or at your business or at your school if you're using someone like that. The all the software in between it, and then the head end gear. So it's a complete end-to-end scenario where they're looking to improve the overall latency. And there's plenty of, if you look up low latency DOCSIS, you can read about that. So that's certainly one thing. The second thing, as Henry mentioned, we're seeing connections of 10 and even faster to the internet, 10 gig and faster becoming more predominant. And again, I would look into redundant WAN links. We can certainly design around that with multiple switches, maybe a spine leaf type configuration where you're not giving any player an additional advantage, and then put in some redundancy protocols for it. But there are a number of different things that you can do. But overall, I would say it's probably the number one effect of slowing the experience of having a good gaming experience is the ISP bottleneck.
Gotcha. Thanks, Bill.
Mhm.
So Henry, how do you think schools could maximize the bandwidth that they've already have in their network? What are some things they could do?
Yeah, so that's actually a super important question. When you start small, 5 computers, you don't really, you're putting a load on your network, but it's not massive. But once you scale up to like one of our customers, the University of Akron, they have 96 esports computers, right? And let's say Overwatch has an update and it's 5 gigabytes. All 96 of those devices need to go out to the internet and pull that 5 gigabytes of data down at the same time. And when you have, your bottlenecking your network, all of that's going through the same pipeline, it significantly slows everything down. And one important thing about esports too is because they are online games, if you don't update them, you can't play them. So, if you have a game and you're like, oh, I didn't get around to the update, you don't have the option to just say, I'm not going to update it. We'll just play anyway. You have to update it so that everyone's on the same game, the same patch, the same experience to keep it competitive. So, generally speaking, I've seen coaches, or they'll have a student assistant or something that usually goes into the lab every single day and makes sure that the games they're going to play are updated and try to stay on top of it. And especially before a match, the last thing you want to do is show up to your match and then realize the game had an update that day and you're not ready and your opponent's waiting for 15 minutes while you're trying to download all the updates. So just staying on top of that and knowing that that's going to happen on a regular basis. A lot of these games will have daily, sometimes weekly updates, and they can be anywhere from 2 gigs all the way up to 20 plus. It just kind of depends on the title. If like Warzone, for instance, comes out with a new map, that's going to be an 80 gig update. And that's going to take a lot of time to download, especially of all of these devices. So one of the ways to kind of overcome that is something we developed is our game cache. It's a product we sell. And essentially, once you download the data once, it caches it to a cache box. And then when any other device pulls that same data, it reaches out to the cache box instead of reaching out to your network. So this allows you to keep that bandwidth. You download it one time, then everything's going to go out to this cache box, which leaves the rest of your network open and opens up your bandwidth for other people on the network doing other things, or people playing other games, or everything else. So focusing on that kind of stuff, and just kind of coming up with a good game plan around game updates and how to maximize your bandwidth for what you have. The last thing you want to do is overload your network with too many devices or too many things happening at one time to the point where everyone's experience slows down and you have a poor experience for everyone around. So it's just a couple things you can consider and kind of try to keep in mind when you're having a program. You don't really see it so much on the small end, but once you start to scale, that's where you really start to see the difference. And another thing too is if you do get to a program that is pretty big, considering a separate internet drop directly for your program is a huge factor. A lot of people are doing that, especially on the collegiate level, and I'm starting to see it more and more on the high school level as well, just so they kind of have their own separate bandwidth, and they're not taking away from everyone else. Or another good point too is using, a lot of these programs operate after school. So when your bandwidth for the rest of your network's kind of not taking a massive hit from all of the students in the building, you know, you kind of have that little extra bandwidth after school when other people aren't hitting the network with a bunch of other things. So utilizing times kind of outside of your busy hours and making sure that you're not, you know, adding to your network strain in your peak hours is also kind of an important thought, and something to keep in mind as well. But
Awesome. Well, it looks like I'm going to be picking on you again. So, um, what do you think are some best practices when it comes to like setting up the firewall and such for esports? Like, what are some good tips there?
yeah, so firewall and esports is probably one of the biggest issues I come across on a pretty regular basis. Most game launchers, for instance, like Steam, Epic, Battle.net, are blocked by your generic firewall 99% of the time. And without port forwarding or doing some kind of adjustments to your network, you're not going to be able to launch these games at all or compete on them whatsoever. You know, if you have a super strict NAT type, you'll also run into this on like Nintendo Switches and stuff where you just have zero access to play online, or you can't connect with other players that aren't on the exact same NAT as you. And so coming up with a game plan ahead of time and kind of working with your network engineers and your provider and everything else to be prepared for when you do start an esports program is super important. You know, I've seen teachers that, you know, they just kind of, they got a grant or something and they'll buy a bunch of PCs and they'll get it. And then their tech team's like, and they hook them all up and they try to play a game and it doesn't work. And we're like, did you loop in your network administrator? And they're like, oh, we needed to. And then, you know, it's this whole thing that delays the whole process and they weren't prepared for it because there wasn't a really good communication there. So ways to work around these issues is the most common is going to be a separate VLAN. I see that a lot. You can kind of just put everything on its own network, open that network up as much as you feel comfortable. Mostly just opening up those IP or those do some port forwarding and some things along those lines, or you can do a DMZ zone as well, in order to just keep as much of them kind of on their own separate area, all your esport PCs, and then have them as open as possible to the internet. The more open you can make it, the better experience they're going to have. You know, you can work around it, and you know, there's other ways to do some things like this, but generally speaking, the more open you can have it, the better it's going to be. So another thing to keep in mind is content filtering. If you do that, you won't notice it most of the time on like a day-to-day tasks that, you know, internet tasks, people just doing, you know, surfing the web or whatever else. But when it does come to gaming, it can add a pretty significant amount of lag, and it can also add to frame drops as well. So it's something to kind of avoid on your gaming network if you can. You know, it kind of comes back to that earlier point of trying to keep it as open as possible, but also, you know, obviously you want to keep your security in mind as well. And then the last thing I like to touch on is every network's different and it varies in complexity. You know, one solution doesn't fit all. So, you know, working with, like I said, your networking team, working with your network provider like Bytespeed or whoever it is, or Ruckus, or, you know, anyone that is involved in your network to come up with the best solution for you, and coming up with that solution early instead of when it's too late, is super important. So the last thing you want to do is buy a bunch of equipment and then get it, and then you can't use it because your network, you know, isn't set up for it. So keeping that all in mind just goes a long ways to kind of help you have a successful deployment when you finally do get around to it. So.
All right. Thanks, Henry.
Yep.
So Bill, what are some things that you think like Ruckus Analytics could do to help, you know, with their networks and maybe potentially IDing issues and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, so the first thing before jumping right into analytics, is just some common terminology. Obviously you have latency, which is, you know, every network has latency, right, of some sort. In a good way to think of it is when I start speaking, it's how quickly do you hear me, right? But jitter is kind of a sub-measure of latency, for lack of a better description. And really when, you know, it's the difference in when the packets are received, when they're coming in at different times. And that's where you really get into some issues as well. Obviously, latency is bad if you have some players have a lesser latency than others. I mean, Chicago has a huge high frequency trading marketplace here. So very familiar with the effects of latency on trading, giving one stock trader the advantage, even if it's a nanosecond faster than others, is a huge issue. Well, the same things with gaming. But jitter is another scenario, and that would show up in stalls and those sorts of things with what you're looking at. And those are the two common things. Latency you can test just with the common ping command, right? That comes along without anything. You can just drop down to a DOS prompt and go ahead and do a ping command. Jitter is a little bit different to be able to measure that, and really you need more specialized tools to take a look at that. I will share one slide here as I'm looking at this, and hopefully my screen share works okay. So you let me know if this is coming through okay. So you able to see that okay? Let me actually enlarge it, sorry. Is that coming through okay, Aaron?
Yep, I'm able to see it. Yep.
Okay, great. So this is a screenshot that I took from a tool that's our analytics tool. And it does work with our switches and our Wi-Fi equipment. And what you're seeing here is a measure of both latency and jitter for a Zoom call. So we have the ability to initiate a test Zoom call from within the analytics tool, and it'll actually run over the network to a sample link that we provided. And what you do is you emulate a call from one end to the other. So somebody could be at home, somebody could be in another classroom, whatever it might be, and you run through that. Our analytics tool has a connection into Zoom via their APIs, and we're actually gauging information from that call that helps us understand what the jitter and latency looks like. As I mentioned, latency is something that you can just take a look at through ping. Jitter is a more difficult thing to actually get your arms around. There are specialized test tools that vendors like Ruckus acquire, that we hook up to the ports on the switches and actually analyze what it looks like. But it's not so easy for a live network. So wanted to point that out. That's one tool you can use. Other vendors have tools that you might want to consider as well. Ruckus Analytics, gives you 12 months of data storage in the cloud. Gives you the ability to go back and look at things after the fact. Let's say at a competition and people were claiming that issues were occurring. You can take a look at things like on the Wi-Fi side, connectivity, people that having logged on and having issues from that standpoint. And we're expanding the tool set within the tool every day. So, but that's a picture of what we're looking at there. Hope that helps.
Yeah, definitely. So one more here for Henry. So why do you think why people should be worrying about esports now? Like what are some things that you believe they should be thinking about?
Yeah, so it's probably everybody knows esports is kind of growing pretty fast. You probably didn't hear about it 10 years ago, maybe 5 years ago. You kind of started to kind of hear about it, and nowadays I would say most people have at least heard about it, or there's been talk about it. One of my favorite statistics is we work with ICEA, which is essentially it's 15 different state organizations that all partner together to do nonprofit esports leagues for their own 15 states. And they all started super small. Most of them would be like 3 to 6 years old now. But Iowa Esports League, when they started their first season, they only had about 15 to 20 schools. In 3 years, they were over 100. So they just blew up like crazy. And once your neighbors get it and the kids start talking about it, then you're like, well, I should probably look into it at my school. Ohio went from 30 the first year to 240 in 5 years. So it's one of those things where it's coming around the corner. It's It's a great opportunity for students that get left out by traditional sports. You know, one of my favorite statistics is 80% of people that participate in esports aren't associated with any other school extracurricular activities at all. So you're reaching a whole new group of people that's kind of been left behind in the past. And, you know, everyone wants kids to be included and to be feel participate, like, you know, they're part of the school and part of the organization, and esports is a great way to do that. And I think, you know, you're only going to see esports continue to grow. And if your school doesn't already have it, I feel like there's most likely you'll be have talks about it in the next coming years. There's over thousands of schools playing esports every year. I think they did a study back in 2019, and there was over 5,900 high schools that were playing esports, and that was in 2019. So, you know, it's growing every day. It's a great industry to be involved in, and, you know, like being prepared ahead of time on your network, along with just kind of what you're planning to do with it, is super important for when it finally does come down the pipeline and you're not kind of scattering to get everything together. You're already prepared, you're ready to go, and you can just have a nice, smooth, solid experience from the start. So.
Nice, thanks.
Mhm.
Okay, so Bill, everybody's favorite subject is E-rate season, right? And so, you know, this season's kind of winding down, but you know, what are some ways that schools can utilize E-rate to help get their network ready, you know, for esports or just for networking in general?
Yeah, so the first thing I'll say is before coming on this call, I circled back with our E-rate specialist to triple check that equipment used for esports is E-rate eligible. And he did validate that, you know, as long as the equipment is going in the school, right? You're not doing a lab or some other type of facility off-prem, it is eligible. So that's the key thing. The Again, not knowing exactly the mix of people that we have on the call, but assuming there's some coaches on the call that aren't exactly familiar with E-rate. Let me just provide a little brief background on that. So, you know, and maybe everybody does know it, so I'll keep it very brief. But funds are basically collected by the federal government, USAC, they're collected from the public, right, via charges on our phone bills, and they're allocated to the school districts and libraries, and they're actually doled out every 5 years. So each district gets an allotment allocated every 5 years. What's available to spend that money on are things like network services, so your ISP, even pulling dark fiber between buildings, network equipment, cabling, the installation services to support that. So having Bytespeed come out and do work for you to do the implementation work is all eligible for that. And your school's reimbursement depends on the percentage of students that get free lunches. And I believe that goes up to 85%. So, and the last thing I'll say is in the current allocation, we're in year 3. So we're in the middle of that 5-year window. So hopefully your school still has some funds left over. And hopefully, you know, you could put out a bid. As Aaron said, we're nearing the end of this year's E-rate cycle to put a bid out. But boy, I would definitely look into taking advantage of it. Going back to my original comment, you know, the switch is not going to really add a tremendous amount of latency to the whole environment. That's going to be more of your ISP, your WAN connection. But gosh, you know, if you've got aging switching infrastructure, or you're just trying to cobble something together, go out for E-rate, get a high powered switch with redundant fans. You'll really appreciate the functionality from that standpoint. So does that help, Aaron?
Yeah, what I'll do is I'll put, we have a guide that we've developed. I'll just put that into the chat window so that, you know, if anybody needs to, they'll have access to it. And then, you know, another question for you would be, you know, what are some things, or how is Ruckus committed to help growing esports? Like, what are some things that you've seen or heard?
Yeah, so you know, I'll share my screen again because I kind of have a slide on some stuff that we're doing. So as Henry was saying, this is a huge market. This is growing rapidly. You know, there's a lot of statistics out there in regards to, you know, 23% growth rate, you know, for manufacturers like us and others, of what this is looking like. 70% of all schools are interested in getting started in esports. You know, the benefits to the students within it, I think we discussed before. So it's a market that we want to support, not just because it's a market we want to go after and it's profitable and it's important to us, but also because it's important to the students. It's a good market to be in. So what we've done is we're a sponsor of NASEF. So they are a leading nonprofit, a leading nonprofit for esports curriculum, and they'll develop that and they perform training. So we're working with them, to reduce the cost of the training that they can provide, but also in working with Bytespeed, for instance, there are ways that we can go ahead and offload that cost even more. So I'll share my screen here just to give you an idea of what we're looking at. Let me give you, tell me when you can see this again, Aaron, if you would.
Sure.
Thanks. You able to see that?
Yep, it's on. Yep.
Cool. I'll make it bigger in a second as soon as this message box goes away. Let's see. Not that one. This one. There. So this is a little bit about NASEF. They do have a self-paced certification class and some more professional development. And this is the actual curriculum if you're looking at it here for anybody that's on here, just to show you the different modules that line up. And so they'll train you on how to bring this into your school, how to build the team, you know, all the different things that we're talking about here, as well as more of the specifics of how to make the team work. And so Ruckus is sponsoring, you know, NASEF. B, we're working with Bytespeed to lower the cost of getting this training. And I would invite you to talk to your Bytespeed rep to learn more about how we're doing that. Does that help, Aaron, or is there anything else maybe I should add to that?
No, I think that helped answer some questions. We do have a link as well that I could share that
Cool.
kind of helps send to that. Let me just throw that in the chat. 1 second here. That's just a link that shows some of the programs that we've got with the NASEF scholarships and stuff. So I guess I got one more question here for you, Bill, is, you know, what new technologies do you see coming up that could help, I guess, or make an impact in esports?
Yeah, so I was talking with my systems engineer a little bit more about this, and Henry about it as well as we were preparing for this. So much of everything is wired, right? It's kind of connections into a switch and basically working through your WAN. However, there is another technology on Wi-Fi coming out, Wi-Fi 7. And the expectation for Wi-Fi 7 is, or the goal, I should say, maybe not the expectation. And for those of you not familiar with the different Wi-Fi naming conventions, you know, we're currently shipping Wi-Fi 6 and Wi-Fi 6E products. Wi-Fi 6E introduced some new spectrum, 6 gigahertz, a whole litany of channels that you can access as well for that. So it's you know, wider channels, a whole different amount of capabilities within 6 gigahertz. Wi-Fi 7 also brings together some nice features where you can actually not only, well, today with Wi-Fi, you can connect to 2.4 or 5, right? With 6E, you can connect to 2.4, 5, or 6. Wi-Fi 7 is going to allow you to change the word or to and obviously this depends on the client, but you can connect to all 3 of those at the same particular point in time. That'll increase throughput. It'll also increase the ability to do some things like lower latency. So the stated goal is to get latency below 5 milliseconds on Wi-Fi and the throughput up to 30 gigabit. Qualcomm is the chipset that Ruckus uses. Other vendors use Broadcom. Ruckus uses Qualcomm. If you go out on Qualcomm's website, they've got a whole ton of information in regards to the promise of Wi-Fi 7. I think this could be very interesting to see. It's also going to be more deterministic, like LTE connections. So I think you'll have lower jitter. There's going to be a nice feature set that's coming for that. So you couple that with VR, augmented reality, some of those sorts of things. I think you're going to see a whole new line of games and what have you. And Ruckus will be shipping products this fall for Wi-Fi 7. So late this fall, you'll start seeing products come out from us. So in time for ERate next year. That would be one thing that I would definitely bring up.
Oh yeah. Well, I think that's all I had for our kind of questions that we were going over. I'm not seeing anything else in the chat. There was one that popped up, but I'm going to have to meet with them separately to go over that with them. And other than that, Henry or Bill, did you have anything else you'd like to touch on?
I don't think I had anything.
No,
Okay.
nothing at this point in time. Appreciate the opportunity and always available for other questions afterwards or face-to-face meetings, whatever you prefer.
Perfect. Well, I guess with that, I think that's pretty much all we had. So just I wanted to say thank you to everybody for joining us. And we'll be sending out a link to this video. So if there's anybody that couldn't make it or couldn't get in, for one reason or another, we'll be sending out links to, via email. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me and I'll do my best to help you out.